So let's go to Hebrews chapter 4, reading from verse 1. Therefore, we must fear if, while a promise remains of entering into his rest. You notice these are land words. Entering into a land, entering into the promised land. What does Hebrews say? Entering into his rest. And if you read the previous chapter, Hebrews chapter 3, you will see the writer of Hebrews was actually talking about the experience of Israel traveling through the wilderness and how they could not, the first generation, could not enter into the rest because they lacked faith. And the rest there was the promised land, but really and truly it was rest in trust of God's power, of God's promise, and God's personality. That was the true rest, right? So a promise remained for the Hebrews in Paul's time, in the apostles' time. That promise had now been manifested in Christ. For any one of you may seem to have come short of it, for indeed we have had good news preached to us, just as they also did. But the they there means the Israelites in the wilderness. But the word they heard did not benefit them because they were not united with those who listened with faith. Notice faith was key. And the word faith there, as I always say, is not just to say, yeah, I believe God, or I believe in God. The faith there means to trust. It means to trust God. Now, the Israelites in the wilderness, they believed in God. I mean, obviously, they saw the miracles. They saw the manifestations on Mount Sinai. They saw the pillar of cloud. They saw the pillar of fire. So they believed in God. But they did not trust God. There's a big difference. They did not trust God. They believed that God would abandon them. They believed that God would destroy them. They believed that God wouldn't keep his promise. They did not trust God. Good? That's the faith it's talking about there. Look at verse 3 now. For we, talking about the Hebrew Christians, the biological descendants of Israel, who have believed. Not all of Israel are Israel, but those who believe, they are Israel. So it says, we who have believed enter that rest. So the promised land, the true promised land, is the rest that is entered in by trusting God, trusting in his promise, trusting in his personality, and trusting in his power. Just as he said, as I swore in my anger, they shall not enter into my rest. Speaking of the generation of Israel that died in the wilderness, they did not enter into his rest, physical rest, which was the promised land, neither his real rest, spiritual rest, trusting in him, although his works were finished from the foundation of the world. So notice, the rest that Hebrews is speaking of is the rest that God rested at the creation. That creation rest. Notice, his works were finished. This is the difference between the creation rest and the seventh-day Sabbath rest. The creation rest, the works were finished. They did not have to be resumed the next week. But the seventh-day Sabbath rest, which is a typological rest, you have to resume working on the first day of the week. But with the creation rest, it is an eternal rest because God finished his work, so he didn't have any more work to do. He was not going to work anymore. And secondly, the seventh day, as it says here, verse 4, for he has said somewhere concerning the seventh day, and God rested on the seventh day from all his works. And the seventh day, if you read in Genesis chapter 2, verse 2, it has no end. You read Genesis chapter 1, evening and the morning were the first day. Evening and the morning were the second day. Evening and the morning were the third day. Evening and the morning were the fourth day. Evening and the morning were the fifth day. Evening and the morning were the sixth day. There is no evening and morning for the seventh day. The seventh day that God rested had no end. It was an eternal day. So the rest that Hebrews is talking about is not a 24-hour rest observed from sunset Friday to sunset Saturday. That's not the rest that Hebrews is talking about. The rest that Hebrews is talking about is eternal rest on an eternal day. So that means it was a spiritual rest in God's finished work. That's what it was about. So that is why Jesus could say, come unto me and I will give you rest. I will place you into the land of rest. I will give you rest from all your enemies. The biggest enemy was the death, the separation from eternal life.